So what is the process for how a criminal case in Utah works through the system? I want to talk about this in particular because I'm doing this video on the day that I understand that the individual accused of murdering Charlie Kirk is going to have what's called his first appearance. So if you're charged in a criminal case and you're summoned to come into court or you're arrested, usually within 48 hours you have to have what's called an initial appearance. At that hearing, two things happen. Number one, there will be initial very, very cursory overview of bail or bond and release conditions. The other thing that will happen is you will be given the opportunity to ask for a public defender or to tell the court you're going to hire an attorney, or the really foolish thing would be to represent yourself. So that initial appearance will take place, and it's really to determine kind of an initial bail status and what are you going to do about an attorney. If you feel you qualify for a public defender at that point, they will go through a process, and each court does it a little bit differently to determine whether you are indigent, whether you qualify for a public defender. Now, the next process and legally is what's called a preliminary hearing. If you're charged in Utah with an A misdemeanor or any level of felony, you're entitled to a preliminary hearing. At that preliminary hearing, the prosecution has to present enough evidence, and there are some exceptions to the hearsay rule and some other things that come into that preliminary hearing, but they have to present enough evidence to demonstrate that more likely than not a crime was committed and more likely than not you did it, and all inferences or all facts need to be interpreted in a way that's most favorable to the prosecution. So, silly example, if someone's coat was pink or purple makes a difference in whether you're guilty or not, and purple convicts you, then it will be purple for purposes of preliminary hearing. Now, you can still argue that at trial. Now, here's the situation that happens. Most people waive their preliminary hearing. They concede that the prosecution has enough evidence to kind of cross that first threshold, so they will waive a preliminary hearing. And you can make that choice in a criminal case. You can say, I'm going to waive it. So in southern Utah, where I practice, typically what will happen is you'll have your initial appearance and then they will schedule what they call a waiver hearing, which will be, within a week or so. If you're in custody, it'll be out maybe 4 or 5 weeks if you're out of custody. And the idea is by the time the waiver hearing rolls around, your attorney has enough of the police reports and any video evidence and photographic evidence. They've got the stuff that they need to advise you intelligently on whether or not a preliminary hearing may or may not help your case. So if you decide to have a preliminary hearing, it'll happen. And then after a preliminary hearing, if the judge finds that there's enough to move you forward to a trial, it's called you are bound over. You are bound over for trial is a legal term. And then at that point, they would schedule a pretrial hearing sometime down the road to discuss for the attorneys to work either to a resolution or toward trial evidence and witnesses and just a bunch of stuff that goes into that. If you choose to waive your preliminary hearing, then you are also bound over. Now, after you're bound over, now you're heading for a trial. It's only after bind over that you enter a plea agreement or you enter a plea. So, initial appearance, preliminary hearing or waiver of a preliminary hearing, and bind over to an arraignment. It is at arraignment that you either plead guilty, not guilty, or no contest, sometimes called nolo contendere, where you're just not going to contest it, but you're going to take some kind of an agreement, or you just want to plead guilty for some silly reason. So at arraignment, you enter your plea agreement, your plea. You say, I'm either guilty or not guilty or no contest. Most people at the initial arraignment, unless a settlement has been reached, will plead not guilty whether they're guilty or not, but it preserves their rights to go to a trial. Now you get into working with your attorney for trial prep. Depending on the nature of the case, we may get different experts in to do evaluations of you. We may get experts to evaluate some of the evidence that the prosecution has provided us. We may retain a private investigator to go and interview witnesses and see what those witnesses have to say. Recently, I did that on a case, and the witness's testimony was very helpful to get us a much, much better offer out of the prosecution, and even some parts of a case actually dismissed. So we will do that work as we get ready for a trial. Now, what happens with trial, if you're going for a jury trial, which most cases should, is for a jury trial, they will schedule out pretrials. And at a pretrial, the idea is there may be 20, 30 cases on a particular day for a pretrial for a jury trial in a few weeks or in a month or so. And at that thing, some things happen. Some cases will resolve at that point, and there will be a plea agreement made. Some cases will say, Judge, we want to we're ready for trial, let's go. Some people might say, we're still working through the evidence, we're still working with experts, we're still trying to figure out what's really going on with this case. So all the cases that are set for trial at the next trial day or week or whatever it might be will be prioritized. Now, this is the general order of priority. If you are in custody on a misdemeanor case, you will be at the top of the heap for a jury trial. If you are in custody for a felony case, you come right after those misdemeanors. So in custody misdemeanors, then in custody felonies, then the next will be out of custody felonies, followed by out of custody misdemeanors. So what will happen? For a jury trial day, there may be 6 or 8 cases that are prioritized for trial. And at that point, a whole bunch of people are getting ready for trial. A lot of cases will settle on the day before trial, the morning of trial. So even though you might be prioritized 4 or 5 or 6 or even 8, you've still got to be getting ready for trial with your attorney, and then you do the trial. I'm going to do a whole nother thing about how a trial works, but 2 things can happen in a trial. You can either be found guilty or not guilty. If you're found guilty, that will be set for a sentencing hearing. If you're not guilty, case is done. You can go home. Sentencing, you have a right in Utah to be sentenced not sooner than 2 nor more than 45 days. And you can waive that and get a little bit more time if you're out of custody. If people are in custody, we usually get that done in that 6-week period. So then it's set for a sentencing hearing. Sometimes you get what's called a pre-sentence report done, where someone will look into, kind of your background and history, criminal record, the facts of the cases found by the jury, and make a recommendation under the sentencing guidelines to the judge as to what your sentence ought to be. And then you have a sentencing hearing. The sentencing hearing is, a process of kind of arguing what should the consequences be of this conviction. If you've reached a plea agreement any time along the way, usually part of that is an agreement on what the sentence will be. Now, my experience is more than 98% of the time, the judges are going to go along with whatever stipulated sentencing agreement has been reached between your attorney and the prosecution. But sentencing is when you can have character witnesses come testify and talk about all, how you're a great guy and this is a crazy thing that happened on this one time. So that's kind of a very broad overview of the criminal process in Utah. So as you're watching this, Charlie Kirk murder and the things that are happening, I hope this helps you understand that. And if you've got any questions, you want a consultation, or if you're looking at criminal charges, get in touch with us. We'd be glad to help.